Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the 9th Asia Pacific ADR Virtual Conference. My name is Sally O, and I'm Case Counsel at KCAB International. I am delighted to be your host for 2020, which has been quite a year for us all. Worldwide, we have experienced unusual circumstances never before seen, and the world of arbitration has also changed in many ways. This is why this year's conference is dedicated to the new arbitration landscape of 2020 and also what we face beyond these times. Although there have been certain new restrictions, we are still grateful to be able to see you face to face, to celebrate our interest in and share discussions on alternative dispute resolution. On behalf of the organisers, I thank you all very much for joining us today for this year's conference. Without further ado, we will now begin our opening. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce the Honourable Choo, the Minister of Justice of Republic of Korea. It is a great honour to have her join us today. Minister Choo, please.
존경하는 내외 기빈 여러분 반갑습니다. 법무부 장관 추미애입니다. 세계 각국의 전문가 여러분들을 모시고 제9회 아시아 태평양 ADR 컨퍼런스를 개최하게 된 것을 매우 기쁘게 생각합니다. 먼저 이번 컨퍼런스를 준비하기 위해 애써주신 UN 국제 상거래법위원회의 안나 주빈블레 사무국장님, 대한상사중재원 이호원 원장님, ICC 국제중재재판소 알렉시 무허 소장님, 국제투자분쟁해결센터 맥키니어 사무총장님, 그리고 대한상사중재원 국제중재센터 신희택 리장님께 깊이 감사드립니다. 또한 코로나19로 인하여 어려운 시기임에도 이번 컨퍼런스에 참석해 주신 여러분들 모두를 진심으로 환영합니다. 2012년에 시작한 아시아 태평양 ADR 컨퍼런스가 올해로 9주년을 맞이하게 되었습니다. 아시아 태평양 ADR 컨퍼런스는 어느덧 세계 각국의 중재 전문가 200여 명이 참석하는 국제 중재 분야의 대표적인 행사이자 축제로 자리매김하였습니다. 중재는 효율적이고 합리적인 분쟁 해결 수단으로 주목을 받고 있으며 특히 코로나19로 인하여 그 필요성이 어느 때보다 커지고 있습니다. 과거에는 상사, 건설 등의 분야를 중심으로 활용되었다면 지금은 의료, 엔터테인먼트, 국제 지식재산권, 공정거래, 소비자권의 보호와 같은 여러 분야에 걸쳐 다양하게 활용되고 있습니다. 특히나 국제 분쟁에 관해서는 더 이상 대체적인 분쟁 해결 수단이라고 불리기 어려울 정도로 그 어떤 수단보다도 편리하고 신속하게 분쟁을 해결하고 있습니다. 이러한 흐름 속에서 세계 각국 전문가들이 모여 중재 등 대체적 분쟁 해결 수단에 관한 최신 동향을 상호 공유하고 앞으로의 변화와 전망을 모색하는 오늘 이 자리는 그 의미가 매우 크다고 할 것입니다. 이번 컨퍼런스에서는 중재의 새로운 발전 방향, 감염병 확산으로 인한 중재 실무의 변화 양상 등을 주제로 하여 심도 깊은 논의를 진행할 예정입니다. 이틀간의 열띤 논의가 국제거래 활성화와 분쟁 해결에 기여하고 더 나아가 평화와 공동 번영에도 이바지할 것이라고 믿습니다. 이번 컨퍼런스가 보다 풍성한 결실을 맺을 수 있도록 여러분들의 경험과 지혜를 나눠주시기를 바랍니다. 대한민국 법무부도 국제사회의 신뢰를 받을 수 있는 선진 분쟁 해결 시스템 구축을 위해 인적, 물적 지원을 아끼지 않겠습니다. 나아가 대한민국이 동북아 국제중재의 허브로 도약할 수 있도록 국제중재 인프라를 조성하고 중재 전문가를 양성하는 등 필요한 지원을 아끼지 않겠습니다. 다시 한번 오늘 참석해 주신 국내외 기빈 여러분들을 진심으로 환영하며 모든 분들의 건강과 행복을 기원합니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you, Minister Choo, for your valuable support. Next, to welcome us all, I'm delighted to introduce Professor Hi-Taek Shin, Chairman of KCAB International. Please, Professor Shin.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen all around the world. As the chairman of KCAB International, it is my great privilege and honor to deliver welcome remarks at the 9th Asia Pacific ADR Conference. On behalf of KCAB International, I would like to convey my deep appreciation to the representatives of our co-organizers, the Honorable Choo, the Minister of Justice of the Republic of Korea, Mourre, Secretary of UNCITRAL, and Alexis Mourre, President of ICC International Court of Arbitration. Your continuing support and the extraordinary efforts of the officers of co-organizers may have made possible the success of this conference. I would also like to express my sincere gratitude to our distinguished speakers, discussants, and moderators. Quite a number of them are joining us from different and thus difficult time zones. This year, due to the lingering concerns of COVID-19, we have decided to hold this conference virtually. To accommodate different time zones, we set the starting time at 4 p.m. in Seoul. The theme of this year's conference is the New Arbitration Landscape 2020 and Beyond. We aim to explore ways of how to take the maximum advantage of our collective experience of the new normal imposed on us by the pandemic to make arbitration and ADR a more efficient and affordable means of dispute resolution in the future when we are able to go back to our ordinary life. Having faced stringent lockdowns, social distancing, and travel restrictions, the international arbitration community has quickly responded to those challenges by transforming the case management services, arbitration procedures, and hearings into virtual mode. I would dare say that this unprecedented experience triggered an awakening of the international arbitration community. In Korea, we have an old saying that crisis is an opportunity. KCAB International believes that it is timely for the international arbitration community to explore ideas as to what the most optimal dispute resolution procedure or frame could be using the momentum generated by the virus pandemic. With this broad picture in mind, we have organized this year's conference in 4 sessions. Today, in the first session to be followed very soon, the representatives of major arbitral institutions will share their experience in adapting to the new normal from the perspective of arbitral institutions, as well as the predictions into the future beyond COVID-19 era. In the second session to be held at 5:45 p.m. today, expert panelists of arbitrators, in-house and outside legal counsels, and the representative of arbitral institution will suggest how to improve the efficiency and accessibility using the new momentum generated by the pandemic under the boundary of international arbitration with focus on small and medium-sized disputes. Session 3 will start at 4 p.m. Korean Standard Time tomorrow, Friday. In session 3, we will hear an update on ISDS reform efforts in UNCITRAL Working Group 3 from Secretary of UNCITRAL, Anna Jubin-Bre, and an update on developments at ICSID from Meg Kinnear, Secretary General of ICSID. Then we will review the development in the investment treaty policies of major jurisdictions, including EU, USA, China, and Korea. We will conclude this session with session 4 tomorrow, starting at 5:40 p.m., which will explore various new procedural models or protocols that embrace innovative ideas and technologies for virtual-friendly settings in new normal era. We hope that the discussion of these new innovative ideas would lead us to the most optimal dispute resolution procedure at an enhanced level of efficiency. The outcome of session 4, I hope, could be an upgraded or expanded version of the Seoul Protocol for video conferencing in international arbitration, which was first announced publicly at the occasion of annual ADR conference in 2018. The Seoul Protocol has been instrumental in supporting KCAB International's very swift adaptation to offering full-scale virtual-friendly settings. KCAB International is firmly committed to offer the users of international arbitration an efficient, reliable, and affordable arbitral services in a beautiful, dynamic, and most importantly, safe city of Seoul. I hope to see you all in person this time next year in Seoul. Until then, please stay safe and healthy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Shin, for your meaningful remarks. It is a great privilege to have the conference opened by our distinguished speakers.
Thank you, Professor Shin, for your meaningful remarks. It is a great privilege to have the conference opened by our distinguished representatives. On that note, we will now begin our sessions for the 2020 conference. Our first session, titled Year 1 of the New Normal, will see our speakers address what has changed and what must change this year within ADR, and also whether these changes are here to stay. This session will be moderated by Ms. Soo-Hyun Lim, Secretary General of KCAB International. Our speakers are Mr. Kevin Nash, Deputy Registrar and Centre Director of SIAC, Mr. Nils Eliasson, Vice Chair of HKIAC and Partner at Sherman & Sterling, Ms. Meg Kinnear, Secretary General of ICSID, Ms. Annette Magnusson, Secretary General of SCC, Mr. Alexis Mourre, President of ICC International Court of Arbitration, and last but not least, Ms. Fedelma Smith, Representative and Senior Legal Counsel at PCA-Singapore. That is all our speakers for session 1. Ms. Lim, when you're ready, please proceed.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to session 1 of today's conference. My name is Soo-Hyun Lim, and I am the Secretary General of KCAB International. And it is my honor and privilege to be the moderator of session 1 of this conference. As can be alluded from the general theme title of this year's conference, no one can deny that COVID-19 has brought an entire new state of things and appears poised to change the arbitration landscape forever in many ways. As mentioned in the welcome remarks by Professor Shin, the pandemic has brought about a rare opportunity for us to seize and to improve, maybe even fix, many of the shortfalls perceived by the users of international arbitration. So to kickstart the conference, we have prepared session 1, which is titled Year 1 of the New Normal, What Has Changed, What Must Change, and Are These Changes Here to Stay? This session aims to introduce participants to the how the participants in the international arbitration field has responded and adapted to the unprecedented challenges posed by the pandemic, and share new ideas on how to turn the so-called new normal into an opportunity to improve efficiency, diversity, and transparency in the arbitration process. And who better to take us through the trends than the very well-known representatives of the leading arbitral institutions around the world? The speakers we have today are so famous that it is almost, it would be almost taking away the precious session time if I introduce them in detail, but you will see their faces and also their names in the flyer, and it is probably better that I give them more time to speak and discuss the topics than go through a dry recitation of their bios. So I will be introducing the speakers as we go into this particular subtopics, but just to give you a general rundown of how the format of this session will go. The first 45 minutes we'll be discussing 5 subtopics that will structure discussions under the general topic of this session. And after the first 45 minutes, we will hear the video recording message from Meg Kinnear of ICSID, as it is 2 a.m. in Washington, D.C., and we all have her recording in advance. After that, we'll have 15 minutes of interaction session where the speakers will freely discuss and comment or react to any of the comments that they heard during the first 45 minutes or the 10 minutes recording from ICSID. So with that, one more thing. We have not allocated a separate time just for Q&A, but I will, as moderator, will be monitoring the Q&A chat box, and we will try to address your questions as we go through the session. So without further ado, I'll be introducing or bringing in topic 1, and we'll start inviting the speakers to comment on these topics. So the first subtopic is something that we hear about, but we always never have enough of. It is a topic of, I would like to ask the representatives from the institutions, what has been the most difficult challenges faced by your institution since the onset of the pandemic? And what measures have the institutions taken to cope with the challenges? So it's basically, how are you holding up type of question.
Hello, everyone, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening. It's really good to see you all, and thank you very much to the organizers for inviting us to share our experiences at this time. As Alexis was alluding to, it's important for the institutions to be able to safeguard operations at this time, but also to take mitigation measures to safeguard also the operations and sort of the health of our staff members. And just addressing briefly then the challenges that we have faced at the SEC at this time and the measures that we have taken. I think we share the experience from everyone this spring, although it happened at different points in time, that things happened very quickly there. For us, it was in March that we sort of from one day to the other had to go home and leave the office and try and continue doing what we were doing from our home offices. So it happened very quickly, but we were able to transfer everything to remote working and keep operations running from one day to the other. So this really, in essence, was not a very large challenge, I must say, although, of course, there were some small minor practicalities associated with that, but the operations were running. And like I said, the top of our list we're always to sort of enable or to ensure the safety of our staff members and safeguard the operations for the SEC and the SEC cases. I think one of the major challenges at that time, and potentially still, is sort of at the more acute phase in March, was that some cases came to a stop, and this obviously was because travel were not possible anymore, or people would fall ill, and hearings and other practicalities in the cases had to be cancelled or postpone. And this was sort of something that happened because the environment changed so quickly for all those involved. So this was a clear challenge for not only for us from the institution, but obviously also for the tribunals and for the parties in our cases. And again, I know from having had conversations with the other institutions that this is not something that was unique for the SSC. This is and this is not very surprising, obviously. I mean, the whole societies came to a standstill, so it affected us too. And I think in this situation, for institutions, as for many other businesses in society, communication became truly important. And we found that many of the parties and the tribunals, they turned to the institutions for guidance. What do you recommend in these situations? What should we be doing? There was a very good conversation also going on between the institutions. And I think this time really demonstrated the strength of the tightly spun net, if you want to call it that, of arbitral institutions across the globe. So we had a lot of bilateral contacts, but we also issued a joint statement from the institutions in April, where we sort of tried to communicate that we understand that this is a difficult time. Obviously, safety for everyone involved should always come first, but there are tools available to have the cases moving forward. At first, I think there were 13 of the institutions that originally signed, the KCAB obviously also being one of them. And then we have had other institutions joining after the original statement was signed and saying, yes, we agree, we support this. So it was really a strong message, I think, from the arbitral community that we can move cases forward. There are tools out there. So the communication measures were quite important. And after having had contacts with the parties, after having communicated to all the pending cases, and after having published this joint statement from the institutions, we did get the sense that calmed things down a bit, that many tribunals, they felt confident that they could push forward and move their hearings, for example, into an online setting, where before there could have been some hesitancy whether you could do that or not, or whether that was a good thing to do. That gave some to push to really to move cases forward, because obviously for our perspective, in addition to safeguarding the health of everyone involved in the proceedings, was also to not let everything come to a standstill, because as we all know, in our disputes, there are important issues at stake for the parties involved, and it could be a big detriment and very costly, and if these cases do not move forward as they are expected to and according to the plan. So we really wanted to keep the wheels turning also in our cases. Obviously this was a tricky balance, but I do get the impression that many tribunals and the parties have really found constructive ways of moving their cases forward. So I think the answer then to the question here on the measures is that I think we have found that, and this again, this is not unique for an arbitral institution setting or an arbitration setting for that matter, that it's important to demonstrate leadership when you have a crisis like this. And this is again been important for many organizations in the pandemic. For example, if speaking very practically, I think as a leader for an international organization, and I'm sure I speak for my colleagues here as well, I find that I need to spend much more time, for example, for management issues. When all of your staff members are suddenly spread out, you need to really devote the time to keep the team together and make sure everything is really working smoothly. Otherwise, I mean, in a normal day, you would see everyone in the office, but obviously here you don't. So you need to find other ways of doing that and really being a supportive manager and leading the team, both on the in the secretariat level, but also when it comes to the bigger picture. To a large extent, we were sort of sailing through uncharted territory here, because none of us had experienced a situation which requires us to really close things down or move home the way it did this spring. And so it was a lot of unknown factors here. But I do think what really helped us is that we can revert to sort of our core values as an organization. So why are we here? What do we set out to do? And what's important for us to be able to continue doing? And these core values, to be able to offer that impartial and independent dispute resolution, in making sure that international arbitration is that oil in the machinery for international trade, and have economies still working and contribute to society, that helped us to know what to do when we were entering this uncharted territory. So I think that's also an experience from this pandemic, that leadership and having a close grip of your core values and being able to communicate that to your community, but also to your team, is really, really important. So that would be sort of some of the lessons learned, and the measures that we took, what they were guided by. I can sort of direct you before I hand over to Alexis. I wrote a piece in something called the SSC forecast not so long ago. You're talking about what's important, what was important for me this spring in leading the team. And I talked about sailing. I talked about how I, as a sailor, I really had experience, a lot of help from that, having that sailor's mindset in terms of, you need to do and solve the problems right now. You need to handle the weather you have before you today and tomorrow. And there's really not much to worry about what happens next week, because who knows what the weather will be like then. And so I was writing about sailing in a COVID-19 context, and it was really interesting because we sent this SSC forecast as part of our newsletter. And I got a lot of response from all over the world from different people. So apparently there are a lot of sailors out there, and many who could sort of identify themselves and with this mindset that is helpful when you go through an uncharted territory and a crisis like the COVID-19 that we are currently living through. So I think I'll stop there and hand over to Alexis.
Thank you, Annette. I'm not a sailor myself, but I really agree with the idea that we can't let cases on a standstill. And definitely this is something we want to hear from Alexis, who leads the institution with a great many number of cases. So Alexis, please.
Thank you, Sue. So to take on Annette's point on selling in rough weather, the first point is measures taken by the institution to ensure continuity of services. That was the paramount concern, of course, in the court back in March of this year, when confinement measures were decided by the French government. And I have to say that we have dealt with it in a very efficient manner. The Secretariat has remained open for business as usual, even remotely. All teams have remained constantly available to parties and arbitrators, and all requests for arbitration and notifications have been processed without any delays. So the court and the Secretariat have continued to function in a seamless way. The court's activities have continued remotely without any added delays. We have since mid-March, held I think more than 80 court sessions online, including our monthly plenaries, which involve on average between 40 to 50 participants. And in spite of the COVID restrictions, we have since March scrutinized, I think, roughly 200 awards remotely, decided about 30 challenges, and made more than 700 procedural decisions of different nature within the normal timelines, with no added delay due to COVID. So it's fair to say that the ICC has been stable, sound, resilient, and that it has ensured business as usual. Of course, the second important point of concern is on the front of arbitration procedures themselves and avoiding delays due to postponement. And on this front, I have to say it has gone both ways. We have, in some instances, seen added delays due essentially to the postponement of evidentiary hearing. We have also seen in many instances an acceleration due to the use of remote means of communication. But of course, in some of the most complex, multi-party, multi-contract, high-value cases with long evidentiary hearings of 2 weeks and more, the question of whether the hearing should be postponed or held remotely has been discussed in many tribunals. Now we needed to provide guidance on this. There was a request on the part of users and arbitrators, and we have issued, as you know, in April, on 9th of April, our COVID-19 guidance note. And the COVID-19 guidance note insists on, first of all, the many tools that are available in the ICC context to enhance the time and cost efficiency of arbitration, Appendix 4 of the rules, the guidance note to parties and arbitral tribunals on the conduct of ICC arbitrations, the Commission note on managing time and cost in arbitration. But the note goes beyond that. It also insists on the need for parties and arbitrators to consider and adopt, whenever appropriate, procedures to hold hearings remotely. And on this point, I would like to make very briefly 2 points. The first is that we have realized that there was some level of ambiguity or misunderstanding as to whether the ICC rules would allow an arbitral tribunal to organize a hearing remotely in absence of an agreement of the parties. And this was due to a poor translation in English of Article 25.2 of the rules, which refers to the parties being heard in person, which does not mean that they should be physically heard, of course, but some parties understood that provision to mean that the parties should be held physically in person, and that was not the case. So we have, first of all, clarified that point in the COVID-19 note by making it clear that arbitrators do have the power to organize a hearing remotely, even if the parties disagree. And in order to dispel any misunderstanding, as you know, we are amending the ICC rules. We have amended the ICC rules, and the new ICC 2021 rules will enter into force on the 1st of January of next year. And we have amended Article 25 to make it very clear that arbitrators do have that power. The second point that I would like to make is that what we are seeing is that remote hearings certainly are becoming the norm and have become the norm in procedural conferences, of course, but also for hearings in expedited cases. As you know, we have our expedited rules in force since 2017 for emergency arbitration hearings, as well as for hearings in simple cases. Now, this has become the norm, and I expect this to survive COVID, if I may say so, and to become the new normal. What we also can predict, I think, is that as technology improves, and it is tremendously improving at the moment, and it will continue to improve, remote hearings will also become more and more frequent in those long and complex evidentiary hearings that I mentioned. Rules will address that. Tribunals should be cautious. Tribunals should be conscious of the legitimate reasons that may exist in some instances and may lead parties in large complex arbitrations to object to remote hearing. We need to be conscious of that. There are many considerations that need to be made, but there is no questions that arbitrators and parties, as they become more and more familiar with the technology, and as technology improves, there is no question that we will see more and more of these evidentiary hearings being held by remote means of communication, and that is a welcome evolution. I think that we have here a cultural evolution, a technological evolution that we will see continuing in the years to come, even as COVID finishes, hopefully. Now, the last point is that, of course, institutions need to be in line with those evolutions. One device that is extremely useful and widely expected from users is an online platform to share submissions and witness statements and expert reports and exhibits online. We do not have that yet completely operational, although this is something that we can already offer. But as from the end of Q1 of next year, we will have a platform which will be very similar to the one that is now being operated by ICSID and the PCA, allowing parties to share their submissions and exhibits on a common platform online. That will be part of the transition to digital that we are operating at the ICC. We have been working in the past years on a new IT platform for the Secretariat for the management of cases, which is now done. It is in the commissioning phase at the moment, and we will have that tool available very soon. So this is what I wanted to say. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I remember seeing the guide to the mitigation of effects of COVID-19. It was quite a comprehensive document. I'm glad you mentioned remote hearings, because despite all the gloom and doom that brought by COVID-19, it's surprising to hear that so many practitioners say that it is actually easier to schedule deliberations and hearings. I'd like to call on Kevin to discuss the experience by the SIAC. Oh, and first, to the viewers, Gary Bourne wasn't able to join for us, and Kevin kindly offered to sit in and share SIAC's experience. So we are tremendously grateful for him. So Kevin?
Thank you, Sue. It is great to see you. I'm sorry that we all can't be together in person, but it is great to see everyone online. I think I would certainly second everything that Annette and Alexis has had to say. What has been really encouraging for me is not only how the institutions have been working together, which KCAB was at the front of the curve with the release of the Seoul Protocol. I think all institutions have now added to this jurisprudence, provided guidance to the users, because as Annette said, I think this was a time when users were really looking for guidance, and they were looking to the institutions more than usual. Whether you are a light touch institution or a very structured institution, parties with disputes wanted to know that these disputes could still be taken care of, could still be adjudicated. So to me, as an arbitration practitioner, I've been really proud of what I've seen of arbitration. And the SIAC experience was, for the first week, I think the parties were a bit tentative about what was going to happen to these arbitrations, how is it going to work, and then things got very, very busy after that. And that is what I'm hearing from a lot of the institutions. Some of these are disputes that have been in the pipeline, and others are disputes that are either indirectly or directly arising out of COVID-19. The way that we operate, because institutions and arbitration have been preparing for this for a long time, this accelerated, I think, the development, necessity being the mother of all invention. Every institution has an automated case management system. We at SIAC are able to operate remotely. We are still in the office, or we're now in the office 3 times a week. Parties still from time to time will want to file physical pleadings. I think that all the institutions, by encouraging parties to file electronically, is not only good from an efficiency and streamlining standpoint, it's very good for the environment as well. I mean, we have to think about our social place in the world and encouraging this, not only from an efficiency standpoint, but no longer seeing those boxes of A4s in perhaps 8 volumes that show up at the door of the institution. I think maintaining the service standards is something that we've looked at very closely. Service standards and employee welfare. We have a team of international lawyers, and while the situation is stable and improving in Singapore, managing the team, you don't have that interaction in the office. Arbitrators are not able to drop by in the same way. So that's been really important to stay in touch with our users, arbitrators, our international lawyers who are in Singapore right now. So we're operating on split teams. We've divided the lawyers in half. We've actually been hiring throughout the pandemic because we want to make sure that we're just as fast, if not faster, following on the lead of KCAB, SEC, ICC on all the guidance. We've issued guidance on taking your arbitration remote. When you really look at all of the available resources now on virtual hearings, because we all knew about virtual hearings from long ago, but usually that was maybe one witness that was far away. Now you have these fully virtual hearings. And I think that even experienced practitioners sometimes didn't know exactly what to do with those. So what we wanted to do is try to provide a practical, very commercial checklist. So whether you're a first-time user of virtual hearings or a very experienced user, you can still go through this checklist just to make sure that you have some of these practical considerations in place. We tried to advance how we were doing things a bit, knowing that we're dealing with users remotely. So we have a live chat feature on the website, so any user can come to the SIAC website, ask a question, obviously not an ex parte question on a live case, but any question about SIAC's processes and procedures. How are you guys dealing with that? You can talk to an international lawyer, sometimes even a humble deputy registrar will be manning the live chat as well. So that's proven quite popular. We're making sure that our counsel are sitting in on the virtual hearings, particularly in the context of, say, emergency arbitration. We are already doing that anyways, because then the case counsel is going to be alive to what's happening in the case. That can help expedite the scrutiny process. But now, as a matter of course, we're having the SIAC counsel sitting in on the hearings. To me, the biggest challenge outside of these general challenges that I was mentioning is in Asia Pacific. There are many interesting procedural requirements. There are jurisdictions that do require wet ink copies of awards. Now, we know that prudent tribunals are going to be getting the parties to agree on electronic notification. Institutions such as LCIA and their new rules now have a provision for electronic signatures. So tribunals are doing that anyways. But because of certain jurisdictional requirements, we were still transmitting physical copies of the award. And there was a period, say, in and around March and April, where mail and courier service wasn't moving too fast. So getting these physical copies out was one of our biggest challenge. And then in some jurisdictions, you may need a process server. I think that all the provisions that all of we institutions have in our rules have also been very helpful during the pandemic. So emergency arbitration, expedited procedure, early dismissal, all of these are perfectly positioned to be used when there is not only urgency from an interim relief standpoint, but urgency on the merits, because parties perhaps not quite as liquid. There could be an event down the road, or just that very standard COVID-19 dispute when a party has not performed a contract, does not deny that it hasn't performed the contract, but it becomes a legal argument about the parameters of the force majeure clause, whether or not it would apply to this dispute. And I guess for all of us, as my final point, and more broadly, I think that the marketing of dispute resolution services is different and perhaps better. We can now reach users at an event such as this. We can have users from all around the globe that are tuning in, learning more about arbitration, learning about all the institutions, developing the overall practice of arbitration, rather than having to be at an in-person event. So when I'm looking forward and doing a little bit of crystal ball gazing, I think that we're going to start to have mini events that are entirely virtual, even when we're all back traveling again. So there have been challenges, but I think that the way that arbitration has emerged, SIAC has dealt with this, has really been encouraging.
Thank you, Kevin. I think everybody had problems with couriers and postage. Even Korea, where COVID-19 pandemic was pretty much well controlled, we had problems starting the process because some jurisdictions had the service of the request for arbitration or notice of arbitration delayed. Let me turn to Fedelma. We know historically that PCA has dealt with many high-profile, complex cases that naturally require longer lengths of hearings. So how has the PCA been dealing with the schedulings and the hearings?
Well, thank you very much, Sue, and it is a pleasure to be here today. So in regard to the scheduling of hearings, it has been to some extent more difficult than before, but as you already said, it has also been easier. So there are several layers to this situation. Firstly, in relation to hearings and deliberations that had been diarized before the pandemic broke out, these have had to be adjusted, and the approach taken by tribunals has varied depending on the circumstances of the case, including the complexity and urgency of the hearing in question. But they fall for the most part into three categories. Some have opted to hold the hearing by video conference. Some tribunals have postponed hearings, and some have only set new dates, and they have reserved their decision for later on whether the postponed hearing would be by video conference or in person. In the PCA's experience, notwithstanding the complexity of most of the cases involved, then there is a trend towards accepting and planning hearings entirely by video conference. And in fact, typically these are easier to schedule than in-person hearings because they involve little or no travel for the hearing participants. So since the pandemic became a global phenomenon, so far the PCA has held approximately 50 hearings in evidentiary hearings by video conference, and an equal number of deliberations or smaller hearings also by video conference. Now, it's the increased ease of holding hearings due to the uptake of video conferencing is especially apparent in hearings on interim measures, where all parties are generally in agreement on the urgency of proceeding with the hearing. And then turning to the challenges of scheduling hearings, then it has also become more difficult in other ways. The chief difficulty is probably that everything is still so much in flux. It's an insurmountable fact that the pandemic is here with us all. And it's also an immovable fact that we don't know when it will end, and we have no control over the various lockdowns that are in place and the various restrictions and the variety between those restrictions, which mean that it's not something that you can plan with, and it's not even something you can potentially plan with. And a further immovable fact is that the Earth is round and we have different time zones. And that, in scheduling a remote hearing, is probably one of the biggest challenges. So even in cases where everybody agrees on the need to proceed with a remote hearing, then depending on where people are located, there is the permanent potential difficulty of accommodating all of the time zones concerned. On the plus side, though, that there's actually a synergy that we see between the fact that there is a narrower window in the day when you can hold a fully remote hearing on a global basis, but that coincides with people's attention spans for focusing on a hearing on screen compared with focusing on a hearing in person. And going back to things becoming easier, then something else that we see becoming more possible due to fully remote hearings is that hearings can be more easily broken up into component parts. So for example, if you have a desire to hold closing arguments maybe a few days after all of the evidence is concluded instead of straight away, because everybody is not in the same location and imminently traveling off again, but rather people are participating from home in a fully remote hearing, then it has been, it's become easier to break hearings up rather than holding the hearing on all issues during one time window. Thank you.
Thank you, Fedelma, for that. I think you mentioned that there are many, many changes to the way you schedule, and the difficulties of time zone is always a problem. I think that also may, or actually the fact that you don't have to travel also may affect one crucial element, which is an issue that could be near and dear to the hearts of some of us participants in the international arbitration, which is the selection of arbitrators. The question is whether there has been, due to this, the fact that there is even no need to travel to a hearing, what does that change actually affect the consideration when selecting arbitrators? And this is a question that I might want to ask Nils from HKIAC to respond to.
Thank you, Sue, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to participate in this conference. And I will, on this topic of the selection of arbitrator, I will be quite brief and spend a bit more of my time on the next topic that is coming up later on regarding technological innovations. But on this very topic, of course, everyone who is involved in selection of arbitrators knows that the appointment of an arbitrator, be it by an institution or by parties, comes down to a number of hard and soft factors, and it is very difficult to present any scientific data on to what extent the pandemic might have affected the selection processes involved in appointing arbitrators. That said, my very strong impression is that the pandemic, or rather experiences that we have drawn from the pandemic, has sort of put the spotlight on a number of issues that I think is important now, but will continue to be important even after the pandemic is gone. And one of those is flexibility and adaptability. Parties and institutions alike will remember arbitrators who have been very flexible and adaptable in finding or accepting solutions to move forward with cases when that is required and in the best interest of the parties, while at the same time have the integrity to push back when due process so requires. Another important issue that is not existed way before the pandemic, but I think has been put in the spotlight by the pandemic even more is time availability and proactiveness. And having now learned and experienced firsthand how easy it is to be flexible, to schedule hearings virtually, to adapt to circumstances, I think that we will see that parties will require arbitrators going forward to always make full use of the inherent flexibility of arbitration proceedings. Parties and institutions will favor arbitrators who understand the importance of immediately getting on top of a case and proposing procedures that are truly tailor-made to the requirements of each case, rather than rolling out template procedure order number 1 for each case without properly understanding the specificities of the case in question. Parties will also, and institutions will favor arbitrators that stay on top of cases throughout. Even after the case management conference, the arbitrators do not put the file away and get back to the case shortly before the hearing, but rather stays on top of the case and being proactive throughout the procedure, scheduling, for instance, short virtual hearings after the first round of submissions to give more proactive guidance to the parties that will run the proceedings in a more efficient manner. I think all of these factors, which are not directly related to the pandemic but have been put in the spotlight by the pandemic, will be very important going forward. Then, of course, a third and last point that is more truly pandemic related and which goes against the flexibility and possibility of having virtual hearings is, of course, that the fact that most of us are operating in jurisdictions with travel restrictions at the moment, there might also be cases that are the very opposite, where you have counsel and co-arbitrators in the same jurisdiction and parties that emphasize the importance of a physical hearing. And then it can actually be the reverse, that it is important that the presiding arbitrator is also in the same location. So we can see this going both ways in terms of location becoming more or less important. I think those were all my 3 observations on this point. Thank you.
Thank you for those very insightful comments. It's much to think about and to I guess watch out for in the coming years. About the selection of arbitrators, maybe Fedelma also may have a comment on that as well.
Thank you. Yes, so I fully agree with and echo what Nils has said about the importance of various qualities in arbitrators. So while there is no one-size-fits-all template for what is desirable for the profile of an arbitrator in a particular case, then there are some qualities which are universally appreciated, such as being prompt, being accurate, being flexible. And in that regard, the pandemic has really shone a spotlight on what it now means to exercise those qualities in a world where in-person meetings are no longer possible and where reaction times may need to be accelerated in some cases. And I would also say that in the longer term, we may see a trend towards increased value being placed on the ability to command oral hearings, to the extent that video conferencing may make hearings used more and lead to, as Neil said, more dialogue between parties and arbitrators and more proactive intervention. So arbitrators who have a robust ability to command the trust of the parties and to exercise command over proceedings in person and build consensus, those are important skills that I think we'll see coming to increased light going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think those are traits that we always want to see in our arbitrators. And I guess the changes brought by the pandemic emphasize them even further. Next is a topic which the pandemic has brought on so much emphasis, which is digital technology and how it's used in international arbitration, particularly the hearings. Just now or about 2 hours ago, I was listening into another Seoul ADR festival event hosted by the HKIAC, and I was hearing one of the members of HKIAC proudly explaining the virtual hearing suite. And maybe Nils, you can talk a little bit more about the virtual hearing suite and any of the other technological developments that you've seen at the HKIAC.
Thank you. So I'm happy to do so. And of course, as many of you know, the HKIAC is operating on an integrated basis in the sense that we both have the case management services and the hearing facility services integrated into one and the same organization. So when the pandemic hit Hong Kong with the first wave in February 2020, one of the main concerns were, of course, the operation of the hearing center part. The case management operations, as has been explained by representatives of the other institutions, are easy to manage remotely. The case management staff can work from home if required. Although the center was never closed for business, so to speak, it stayed open in all respects throughout the pandemic, thanks to the very, very controlled management of the pandemic in Hong Kong. We never needed to close down completely and could continue to hold when it was possible, when travel restrictions did not so prevent hold hearings physical throughout the pandemic. But the main concern were, of course, what to do with all the hearings that we could not safely hold at the HKIAC. So we took early decisions to ensure that we would be able to guide parties as an institution, play a very active role in guiding the parties in setting up virtual hearings and guiding them through the planning stage of such hearings and guiding them throughout the conduct of such hearings. And in terms of numbers, that has paid off. We have to date in 2020, we have had 93 hearings at the HKIAC, 60 of which were fully or partially virtual. And based on hearings scheduled for the entirety of this year, 60% of all hearings booked throughout the year will be either fully or partially virtual hearings. And the types of cases have not only been HKIAC cases. We have cooperated with many institutions and held ad hoc cases, ICC cases, SIAC cases, SEC cases, ICC cases. We have also held court hearings through our virtual hearing services for the High Court in Hong Kong, as well as the High Court in Singapore, and also the Supreme Court of British Columbia in Canada. And so what would we do then to facilitate all of this? And it's, to me, the key was an combined investment in human resources and in technology, because we should not forget that technology at the end of the day is only a tool, and it is the implementation of that tool that really makes the difference for the user experience and the quality of a virtual hearing. So what we did on the human resources side was to hire a digital project manager with a long experience in organizing conferences and business meetings with virtual elements for high-profile persons such as Bill Clinton, George Bush Sr., Tony Blair, John Major, and Colin Powell. And he brought with him that very powerful experience and could translate that into quality assuring the hearing experience for arbitrators and users. We also have the IT expertise on the case management staff through our managing counsel Eric Ong, who used to manage IT projects before he became an arbitration lawyer, and to give the parties an assurance that hearings will run smoothly when they are through HKIAC's platforms. We always have a dedicated hearing manager from HKIAC that participates through all stages of the hearing to ensure that everything runs smoothly, and that is regardless of time zones involved in the hearings. On the technology side then, the virtual hearing services that HKIAC provides includes, of course, IP-based encrypted video conferencing, or alternatively video conferencing that is cloud-based and compatible with all major platforms such as Zoom, WebEx, Microsoft Teams, BlueJeans, and others. Document repositories, including online or offline electronic bundles, electronic presentation of evidence, transcription and interpretation services, fully integrated into the virtual hearing experience. And in addition to that, we have also invested in a new virtual hearing suite at the HKIAC, which is particularly helpful for partially virtual hearings, where some aspect of the hearing takes place with in-person participation at the premises of the HKIAC. And we did this by upgrading one of our large hearing rooms into a dedicated virtual hearing suite, which consists of cameras that covers all angles of the room, large digital screens on the walls, multiple mobile screens, and we fitted out the room with an increased AV backbone, which includes 20 plus data ports that makes the room completely flexible and adaptable and scalable, so that you can adapt the room to the needs of any virtual hearing. And in addition to those investments on human resources and technology, we also, drawing from the experience from the first month of virtual hearings, we also developed a very practical and user-friendly guideline on virtual hearings that I recommend everyone to go to the HKIAC website and download, because it does provide very helpful guidance that can be used regardless of whether you are using the HKIAC services or not. So that is what we have done to ensure the smooth operation of the hearing center. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We are slightly going behind time, but I think it's important that not only our virtual hearing capacity is also important, but also the system where you can file and store and share the procedural documents. And I think it was mentioned previously that the SEC has a digital platform which was in place well before the COVID pandemic. And I would like to hear from Annette whether that feature has proven its real worth during the COVID-19 pandemic. And if I could ask you to keep your comments short, maybe 3-4 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes. So in September last year, the SEC introduced what we call then the SEC platform. This is a platform for communication in the SEC cases. And this was introduced as a response to requests and questions received from the parties and tribunals in recent years. And I'm sure all of my colleagues here at the other institutions, you have the same experience. This is something really the users are asking for. And really what this is a tool to have a secure communication in the case, to store your files. This is where you also do your filing by uploading the documents, and you get a very good overview of the proceedings. And it's really used for all the communication in the case between the tribunal and the parties, between the institution and the parties and the tribunal. So it's really a one-stop shop when it comes to sort of managing the case. Once it has landed, the files have sort of been transferred over to the tribunals, or uploaded, I should say then. And it's, like I said, it was introduced in September last year. We did not make it compulsory because we thought this is something that, you want to have people organically grow into using the platform, and it's been really, really successful. So just to throw some numbers at you, we've had close to 3,000 users on the platform so far, and 250 some cases. By now, almost 100% of the cases where this is sort of offered to use the platform, the tribunal and the parties will log in and they will start using the platform. So it's in more or less all of the cases. And some of these cases are, as you can imagine, quite large. Some of the investment treaty cases we're seeing at the SEC, so we have cases where you have 60,000 pages involved in one case. Here, the platform could be quite helpful in sort of getting that overview. And what we're doing with the platform, in addition sort of to expanding the use of it in general, is that we are adding new features to the platform as we move along. So this is sort of a moving target, if you like. We're constantly developing it. So we have added, for example, collaboration with a provider called Exhibit Manager, which means you can use e-briefs on the platform now. We are adding electronic signatures features, and this is useful in some aspects of the proceedings. It's not yet possible to use in all aspects of the proceedings. It was mentioned somewhere earlier, different requirements for different jurisdictions when it comes to sort of this signing of the originals. But there are some elements of the process where it's quite uncontroversial to use electronic signatures. So we're adding that. And I do think one lesson learned, not only from the platform and sort of and the response it has received, it is that what the pandemic has taught us is that we are quite fast, and when I say we, I mean us as a community, at adapting and using digital tools. These digital tools have been around for a long time, and developments that perhaps before would take 1 or 2 years to implement new tools now happen overnight, or maybe 1 or 2 weeks. So it really has made us, everyone, really used to using these tools. So and I think the response for the platform has really demonstrated this. I should say also, once the case is concluded, you could use the platform for storage also of the files relating to the case. So that's another element that makes the platform attractive. So you have one place where you have all the documents relating to the case stored. So we continue to adding new features to the platform, and I do know that there are other institutions out there that are looking into or have already maybe signed up to using a similar tool, and I do think that's a good thing, because then we have sort of a standard that becomes common for many users of international arbitration worldwide, which is a good thing for efficiency in the end.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Definitely, I'm sure there are many institutions, and I'll stop myself from naming any particular ones that would really love to have that digital platform as well. I think given the lapse of time, I think it's a good time for us to hear the message from the ICSID that will share their experience, and then we'll be back for an interactive session with the remaining time. So for the speakers here, sit back and relax. You can have your videos off while we hear the message from ICSID. Okay, we'll see you soon.
Good morning. I'd like to begin by thanking the organizers of the Seoul ADR conference for having me here today. I look forward to this conference every year, and I am sorry I'm not there in person, but I'm so pleased to have this opportunity to participate virtually. The topic of this session is very timely and is part of an evolving conversation. To a large extent, all of us are learning on the go, and we are getting better at managing the impacts of COVID-19 on arbitration hearings. I know that most remote hearings still typically start with everybody saying, "Can you hear me? Can you see me?" But in fact, the capacity of all participants in the process to do effective remote hearings has advanced considerably from just 6 months ago. With that in mind, I wanted to share a few insights from ICSID's perspective. First, on how ICSID has adapted to the challenges posed by the pandemic. Second, on some of the lessons that we've learned so far. And third, on how this experience will, and I'd suggest should, impact international dispute resolution in the longer term, and in particular, some positive outcomes of this whole catastrophe that we've all been dealing with. So how did we adapt? Like many of you, the ICSID Secretariat began home-based work in mid-March, and it very quickly became business as usual. All of our staff are at home and our offices are closed. We benefited immensely from the World Bank Group's IT support in ensuring that we had the right tools to work remotely and helping us to figure out challenges as they arose. So it's worked very well. One of our first steps was to go entirely electronic in managing case documents. This was something we had foreseen in our proposed rule amendments, but we decided to implement it immediately given the circumstances. So it really just pushed us along faster to where we are going. Electronic filing applies to all party submissions, including requests for arbitration. Parties simply no longer send hard copies to ICSID, and everything is sent through our secure, cloud-based platform. Many tribunals have also chosen to work with only electronic copies, some on a temporary basis, but others permanently, finding that it is a very convenient way to work. In addition, all of our correspondence from ICSID and all of our decisions and awards are now transmitted electronically only. Our transition has been remarkably smooth and the benefits are clear. The big upside, of course, is in time and cost savings, given that parties no longer have to prepare and pay for hard copies of often voluminous pleadings that are sent to ICSID and tribunal members. Second, and perhaps the biggest issue, was to quickly adapt to remote hearings. We already had a lot of experience with remote hearings for shorter sessions, what we often called hybrid hearings, where a single witness or a single expert or a single tribunal member joined the main hearing by video conference. But the new challenge, of course, was that most participants were now individually connecting from their homes and relying on their own equipment and internet connectivity. We also had to accommodate a much larger number of remote hearings. Just to give you an example, since we went on home-based work in mid-March, we have organized close to 100 remote sessions, hearings, and deliberations. And a number of these have been very complex hearings involving numerous participants in many different locations with live time transcript and simultaneous interpretation into multiple languages. This, of course, has been challenging, especially where there are significant time differences between the locations of different participants. But it has forced us to innovate, and we have made huge strides in the quality and effectiveness of remote hearings. We now have a lot of people who are very enthusiastic about these and see how well they can go. In terms of lessons learned, the key one, of course, is the importance of testing. Test, test, and test again. So we spend countless hours with the participants before the hearing to ensure they know how to use the technology and the hearing runs smoothly. We have also learned a lot about the pros and cons of different video conferencing platforms and related services for interpretation and court reporting. This means that we can take a much more tailored approach to the services we assemble for each hearing. We've produced several videos with tips on all aspects of a remote hearing from the perspective of arbitrators, counsel, and administering institutions. We've also provided a cumulative bibliography on the various protocols, templates, and articles that have been published since mid-March, and these are all available on our website. I would certainly encourage you to take a look at those, especially if you are facing your first couple of remote hearings. You'll find that they are very, very helpful. The third question that's posed by all of this is, are these changes here to stay? I think that there is no doubt that the new ways of working that I mentioned are going to continue, at least to some extent. So, for example, going fully electronic with filing documents should easily become a permanent feature, and that's certainly what we plan at ICSID. We recognize that it may be difficult to work with electronic copies at first if you're used to hard copy, but it gets easier, and there are a number of software programs that really allow you to work very efficiently with electronic copies, and arbitrators are increasingly appreciative of that. So this is becoming the new norm. As for remote hearings, there clearly has been a shift from skepticism to acceptance, and in a lot of cases to enthusiasm. Most people who have experienced a well-organized remote hearing recognize the advantages in terms of cost and time savings, not to mention less jet lag and a smaller carbon footprint. There are also many who believe that remote hearings force counsel to make more focused arguments and to reevaluate their approach to result in a more concise and effective advocacy. While there has been some concern that it may be difficult to assess the credibility of a witness, we have actually heard to the contrary, that there really is not much difference with an in-person hearing. And in fact, being on a remote platform allows participants to see the witnesses up close and at the right angle, and perhaps to better assess their demeanor. Similarly, in the early days, some counsel raised concerns about witness coaching. And again, these have been well addressed with things like 360-degree cameras and other techniques. Another benefit we've found with remote technology is that it makes scheduling timely hearings and deliberations a lot easier by cutting out the substantial travel time before and after a hearing. Obviously, if you eliminate the need for travel, you have a lot more flexibility and you can find more common availability. And that means that you can possibly hold the hearing or deliberate earlier than you otherwise would have. So as people acclimatize to these remote hearings, I think they will also become increasingly attached to the benefits. That does not mean that we will not have in-person hearings anymore, but I do think we're going to see more remote hearings, especially for proceedings where there are few witnesses or they are expected to be shorter proceedings. I also think what we call hybrid hearings will become much more common. And those are the hearings, of course, where some people participate in person and others participate remotely. Another version of the hybrid hearing is where it is fully remote, but each counsel group is together in one room and the tribunal together, either in different locations or one location. So this works in a number of ways. And I really believe we will see and continue to reap the benefits from remote hearings. At the same time, my fear is that, like sugar addicts who've been on a diet, we may revert back to our love of chocolate chip cookies and discard much of what we have learned to go back to our old norm. And I have to say, I think that would be a real loss for arbitration. We know arbitration desperately needs to deal with time and cost and duration of hearings. And we know that technology gives us a really good way to do this. So we owe it to our discipline to try to continue with the progress we've made, albeit forced by a pandemic, but certainly very extensive progress. So my hope and my encouragement to colleagues is that we should make every effort to use remote hearings wherever we believe they can do the job in the future, and that we continue using and improving these techniques even when we could go back to in-person hearings. So I will leave it there, and I look forward to hearing from my fellow panelists and the audience, and I wish you a good conference.
Thank you. Thank you, Meg. Sorry we couldn't have you live by video link, but the message that you prepared for was very apt. I particularly like the analog about the sugar addict who's just finished the diet. And actually that leads to me the question I had for our interactive session, which we have about 7-8 minutes. I'm glad that we've managed time well so far. The question that I wanted to pose for our interactive session was this: which of the new changes or trends that you've been hearing from your fellow commentators and through the video that was introduced by the new normal do you think will continue even after the pandemic? And maybe this is a question I should first ask Fedelma. What do you think would be the changes that are here to stay with us even after we have the pandemic under control?
Thank you, Sue. I'd like to underscore elements that were mentioned by Meg and Kevin, which are that firstly, and I have 4 points. Firstly, as we saw an uptake of video conference remote hearings by necessity, I believe that we will see an increased uptake of video conferencing for hearings by choice, which I hope that will continue after the pandemic. When we look at the carbon footprint of our industry, that needs to come down. And similarly to saving on fossil fuels, then I also hope that we will save trees by seeing an increase in the use of electronic filings and an increased adaptation of the community to working on screen-based technology. And thirdly, a necessary corollary of these two elements is an increased awareness of cybersecurity as we become more active in the digital sphere. This is something that institutions and participants need to have in mind. And finally, as the technological infrastructure has had to be adapted to accommodate hearings by video conference, then this reduces the added costs of having more attendees and potentially making hearings open to a wider audience. So potentially the arbitration may become more inclusive and, where appropriate, more transparent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And talking about changes into the future that are here for good or for the foreseeable future, I think there was a mention on the new rules of the ICC earlier on. So Alexis, were there any particular trends or changes that the revision team within the ICC had in mind when they were going through the revision? And did any of those changes relate to these new changes under the new normal?
So as I said, the only amendment in the new rules that is directly COVID related is that concerning the powers of the arbitral tribunal to hold the hearing by remote means of communication in absence of an agreement of the parties. These powers pre-existed the new rules, of course, but as I said, there was some ambiguity in Article 25(2) of the rules, which was essentially due to a poor translation in English of the French version of the rules. So we felt that it was necessary to clarify this in the new rules. But this is the only change in the new rules that is directly COVID related. There are a number of other changes there, but they are not directly related to COVID. I don't think we have the time to go through them. We have a couple of amendments regarding complex arbitration, jointers and consolidations, a couple of amendments regarding disclosures and transparency, regarding additional awards, and a number of other items. But the only change that is related to COVID is the one which concerns the organization of hearings online. This being said, the ICC has issued its COVID-19 guidance note, which includes very detailed guidance on how to organize a remote hearing, including a model cyber protocol, guidance as to technical assistance, and the ICC Hearing Center is also available to provide assistance in this regard. We can offer a platform in Paris for the organization of a virtual hearing. And what we are seeing quite often is a tribunal gathering at the hearing center in Paris, with the parties being in different places and the hearing being organized by remote means of communication.
Thank you. All right. Maybe it's be appropriate if I ask all the rest of the speakers about their take after listening to all the new trends and predictions to the future. Maybe I'll start with Kevin. Maybe you could like to share your thoughts on what are the things that will stay even after the pandemic subsides.
You know, so it's interesting because I often say that all of these technological advancements are really to go back to the fundamentals of arbitration to make it fast, cost-effective, a streamlined, party customizable procedure. And I think that every case is always going to be different. I think having these options available is what is very good for arbitration. So once we're back to the previous normal, there will be cases that are perfectly appropriate for virtual hearing, online filing, online document management. But at the same time, at least from an SIAC standpoint, we also want to cater to the autonomy of the parties' preferences. I still think there will be physical filings. I think one of the surely enduring aspects that we've gotten better and better at as a practice is data protection and cybersecurity. That is critically important with the amount of data that institutions control. So that's something that we're surely going to see. And now you're going to have really a very good menu of options. I would be hard pressed to see another case, say, looking out into the future, where you have a 3-member tribunal and all the tribunal members flying in for a relatively simple first procedural meeting or case management conference. I think that era is probably going away. But for the evidentiary hearing where witness credibility is at play, there are going to be counsel and arbitrators that still do want that in-person hearing.
Right, right. And the users and counsels and even arbitrators, as time passes, that become relatively more attuned to the new trends, such as the desire to limit their carbon footprint. So I can imagine that there'll be a lot of change. So maybe I could ask Annette about the changes that you envision will remain even after the pandemic.
Thank you. No, like Kevin alluded to, we have now sort of a very large toolbox, and I think what the pandemic has resulted in is more users discovering the entire toolbox. Like I said, many of these online or digital tools were already there. We were just not really using them. So that is really something I think will stay. I hope will stay. And I agree that given the fact that we have now discovered the full toolbox, but also are sharpening the tools with our most recently won experiences, will make us smarter going forward when it comes to making the choices which will best work towards the goal of efficiency, integrity in each individual case. And that goes for the parties and for the tribunals and for the institutions. So hopefully this entire pandemic, once it's over, we will all be smarter and we will do our job even better after we are over on the other side, so to speak.
Thank you. And last but not least, Nils, can I have your views on this as well?
Thank you, Sue. And you know, I couldn't agree more with what Kevin and Annette and others have said on the point that flexibility is hopefully going to stay. And I hope that Meg was wrong about her point on sugar addicts and that everyone rushing back to the same old procedural order number 1 at the start of the case. I am more optimistic than that. I have successfully stayed off sugar for 5 years now, and it is possible. And I think that the flexible use of the entire toolbox is here to stay, including, of course, the use of virtual hearings when that is suitable. Thank you.
Thank you. And given the limit of time, although I would love to have the speakers stay on and share more of their experience, I think we are already beyond our time. And all I can do for now is to thank Annette and Fedelma and Alexis, Nils, and Kevin for their time and their insight. And thank you for joining. And thank you for all the participants as well. So let me turn this over to our MC of today. So Sally can take us through the rest of the event of the conference of today. Thank you all. See you soon.
Thank you all for the wonderful discussion. Now, before moving on to session 2, we will have a 10-minute break. So please take a moment of rest and return back to us at 5:45 p.m. Korean Standard Time and 9:45 a.m. Central European Time. See you soon. Thank you.